Your soulmate secretly tested your honesty, and broke down in tears when they found out. The day began like any other. Nothing in the morning sky hinted that your life was about to change forever. You woke up believing you were simply moving through another ordinary day, unaware that somewhere, someone had been watching, not to judge your appearance, your success, or your wealth, but something far more valuable. Your honesty. Long before your paths ever crossed, your soulmate had heard stories about people who spoke beautiful words but carried hidden intentions. They had experienced betrayal from friends who promised loyalty but disappeared when life became difficult. They had trusted people who smiled warmly while secretly taking advantage of their kindness. Every disappointment left another scar on their heart. Eventually they made a quiet promise to themselves. If I ever meet the person I'm meant to spend my life with, I won't judge them by what they say. I'll watch what they do when no one is looking. You had no idea that this silent promise existed. Weeks before you noticed them, they noticed you. Not because you were the loudest person in the room. Not because you demanded attention. But because there was something peaceful about you. You greeted strangers with respect. You thanked people who served you. You admitted your mistakes instead of making excuses. Little moments. Tiny decisions. Things most people never noticed. But your soulmate noticed every single one. Still, they weren't ready to trust their heart. They decided to create small situations, never to manipulate you or trap you, but to learn whether your character stayed the same when honesty came with a cost. One afternoon, you found a wallet lying on the ground. There was money inside. Identification. Bank cards. No one else seemed to notice. You could have walked away. You could have taken the cash. No one would have known. Instead, you searched until you found the owner and returned everything exactly as it was. The owner smiled with relief. You simply replied, "It wasn't mine." Hidden nearby, your soulmate watched the entire exchange. Their heart whispered, "Maybe." But fear answered, "One good action doesn't prove someone's heart." Days later, another quiet test appeared. Someone accidentally gave you extra change after a purchase. It wasn't a huge amount. Enough that many people would have convinced themselves it didn't matter. You looked at the money, paused, turned around, and returned it. The cashier looked shocked. "You actually came back?" You smiled. "I'd want someone to do the same for me." Those words stayed in your soulmate's mind all night. Still, they hesitated. Because honesty isn't only about money. It's also about truth when telling the truth feels uncomfortable. Soon another opportunity arrived. At work, someone blamed a mistake on another employee. You knew what had really happened. Remaining silent would protect your own reputation. Speaking up might create problems for you. Everyone waited. Your heartbeat raced. Then you calmly said, "Actually, the mistake was mine." The room became silent. Embarrassment filled the air. But something remarkable happened. Instead of criticizing you, people respected you even more. Your manager nodded. Thank you for being honest. Across the room, your soulmate quietly looked away. Their eyes filled with tears they refused to let anyone see. Because for the first time in years, they believed honest people still existed. Yet fear continued whispering inside them. What if they're only like this because people are watching? So they waited longer. One rainy evening, they created no test at all. Instead, they simply observed. They watched you help an elderly stranger carry groceries without expecting praise. They watched you comfort a child who had fallen. They watched you apologize sincerely after accidentally bumping into someone. No audience. No applause. No reward. Just kindness. That night your soulmate cried. Not because they were sad. Because hope had returned. Hope they thought they had lost forever. Still, one final question remained. Would you remain honest with someone you truly loved? That answer could not be discovered from a wallet. Or extra change. Or workplace mistakes. It could only be revealed through the most difficult test of all. Love. Little did you know, the person quietly observing your life was about to step into it. The next meeting would not happen by accident. It would change both of your futures forever. And neither of you would ever be the same again. A few days later, your paths finally crossed. There was nothing dramatic about the meeting. No thunder rolled across the sky. No music seemed to play in the background. It happened in the most ordinary way, yet it felt strangely unforgettable. Your soulmate greeted you with a warm smile. You smiled back, unaware that they already knew far more about your character than you knew about theirs. As your conversations became more frequent, they discovered something unexpected. The person they had quietly observed from a distance was exactly the same when speaking face to face. You didn't exaggerate your achievements. You didn't pretend to know things you didn't know. When you made a mistake in conversation, you corrected yourself instead of covering it up. Each small moment made the walls around their heart weaken. Still, one fear remained. What if this changes once we become closer? One afternoon, while talking over coffee, your soulmate casually asked, "What's the biggest mistake you've ever made?" Many people would have answered with something that made them look good despite sounding humble. Instead, you paused. You looked down for a moment before answering honestly. I've hurt people without meaning to. I've made promises I couldn't keep. There were times I let fear guide my decisions instead of courage. I can't change those moments, but I've tried to learn from them. Your soulmate wasn't expecting that answer. There was no attempt to appear perfect. Only sincerity. Something inside them began to crack. Later that evening, they sat alone, remembering every disappointment they had experienced in the past. They remembered broken promises, hidden lies, and relationships built on appearances instead of truth. Then they remembered your words. I've tried to learn from them. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to believe that someone could be imperfect and still deeply trustworthy. Over the following weeks, your connection grew naturally. You laughed together. Shared stories from childhood. Talked about dreams for the future. Sometimes the conversations lasted for hours, yet neither of you noticed the time passing. But there was something your soulmate never told you. Every smile they gave you carried a secret. Every kind word hid a question they were afraid to ask. Finally, one evening, they decided they needed one last answer. Not a test to make you fail. A chance to see whether honesty would still come first when the truth felt uncomfortable. They mentioned a rumor about themselves, something untrue that made them seem less successful than they really were. They watched your face carefully. You didn't laugh. You didn't judge. You didn't repeat the rumor to anyone else. Instead, you quietly said, "People deserve to be known for who they really are, not for what others say about them." Those simple words shattered the final wall around their heart. The moment you left that evening, your soulmate closed the door behind them. They stood silently in the middle of the room. Then tears began to fall. Not tears of sadness. Not tears of fear. Tears of relief. They whispered through their tears, "They're real." Years of doubt, heartbreak, and disappointment seemed to melt away in that single moment. For so long, they believed honesty like yours only existed in stories. Now it was standing right in front of them. Yet another challenge remained. If your relationship was going to be built on truth, then they had to tell you something difficult. They had been quietly observing you before you ever met. The thought terrified them. What if they think I betrayed their trust? What if they walk away? For days, they struggled with whether to tell you. Every time they looked into your eyes, guilt grew heavier. Finally, they realized something important. If they truly admired your honesty, they had to practice it themselves. The next conversation would require more courage than anything they had ever done. Taking a deep breath, they sent you a message. "There's something important I need to tell you. Please meet me tomorrow. I want to tell you the whole truth." As you read those words, you had no idea that the conversation waiting for you would change everything you believed about your relationship. And before the night was over, both of your lives would be transformed forever. The next afternoon, you arrived at the quiet cafe where the two of you had agreed to meet. Your soulmate was already there. They weren't smiling the way they usually did. Their hands were wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Their eyes revealed a mixture of fear, hope, and uncertainty. As you sat down, they took a slow breath. "Thank you for coming," they said softly. You could sense that something important was weighing on their heart. For a long moment, neither of you spoke. Finally, they looked into your eyes and said, "Before we met, I already knew who you were." You frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Their voice trembled. "I watched the way you treated people. I saw how you returned a lost wallet. I saw you admit your mistakes at work. I saw you give back money that wasn't yours. I saw you help strangers when no one was watching." Your heart skipped a beat. "You were there?" They nodded slowly, tears beginning to gather in their eyes. I wasn't trying to control your life. I was trying to protect my own heart. They explained the pain of past betrayals, the promises that had been broken, and how fear had convinced them that honesty was too rare to trust. I didn't want to fall in love with another lie, they whispered. The words hung in the air. You remained silent, processing everything they had shared. I know what I did may seem strange, they continued. I've regretted keeping it from you. Every day we grew closer, it became harder to carry this secret. A tear rolled down their cheek. I couldn't keep asking you to be honest while hiding the truth from you. You looked at them carefully. There was no pride in their confession. Only vulnerability. Only regret. You finally spoke. So, everything between us after we met, was real? They answered without hesitation. Every conversation. Every laugh. Every smile. Every feeling. None of that was fake. Their voice broke. I fell in love with the real you. Another tear escaped. I never expected you to be perfect. I only hoped you would be honest. You sat quietly for a moment. Then you asked the question they feared most. Why didn't you trust me enough to simply get to know me? Their eyes filled with fresh tears. Because I trusted the wrong people before. I let fear make decisions that should have belonged to hope. The cafe fell silent around you. Outside, people continued walking past, unaware that two hearts were standing at the edge of a life-changing moment. You reached across the table. They looked at your hand, unsure whether to take it. Then you gently held theirs. I won't pretend this doesn't hurt, you said honestly. Finding out you've been observing me before we met is difficult to process. They lowered their head. I understand. But, you continued, I also understand why you were afraid. They looked up, surprised. You didn't test me because you wanted power over me. You tested me because someone else broke your trust. At those words, they completely broke down. The tears they had been holding back for years finally came pouring out. I was so scared, they cried. I kept waiting for you to become someone different. You squeezed their hand gently. I'm still the same person. They smiled through their tears. I know. For the first time since they had begun watching from a distance, there were no more secrets. No more hidden questions. No more silent tests. Only truth. As the sun began to set outside the cafe windows, both of you realized something important. Real trust isn't built because someone never makes mistakes. It's built when two people choose honesty, even when the truth is uncomfortable. That evening, as you walked home together, the silence between you no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. Neither of you knew exactly what the future would bring. But for the first time, you would face it without hidden fears or hidden tests. Both of you had chosen the same foundation. Truth. And that choice would soon be tested in a way neither of you could have imagined. After the conversation at the cafe, life slowly returned to normal. Or at least, it seemed that way. The secret that had stood between you was finally gone. There were no more hidden observations, no more unanswered questions, and no more silent fears. For the first time, your relationship felt completely open. Your soulmate smiled more often now. The sadness that had once lingered in their eyes was fading, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. They no longer wondered if you were pretending to be someone you weren't. They knew your heart. Weeks passed, and your bond grew stronger than either of you had imagined. You celebrated small victories together, encouraged each other through difficult days, and learned that love wasn't built only during happy moments. It was strengthened through patience, forgiveness, and choosing each other every day. Then one evening, everything changed. You received an unexpected message from someone you hadn't spoken to in years. It was an old friend. They wanted to meet and apologize for how your friendship had ended. There was nothing wrong with accepting the invitation, but you knew it might look strange if you disappeared for several hours without saying anything. For a brief moment, a thought crossed your mind. I could just tell them later. It would avoid unnecessary questions. But almost immediately, you remembered the promise you had both made after the cafe. No more secrets. You picked up your phone and sent a simple message. An old friend reached out. We're meeting to clear up something from the past. I wanted you to know because honesty matters to me. A few moments later, your soulmate replied. Thank you for telling me. I trust you. I hope the conversation brings you peace. You smiled. It was such a small exchange, yet it meant everything. The meeting with your old friend lasted several hours. You talked about misunderstandings, offered forgiveness, and walked away feeling lighter than you had in years. When you returned, your soulmate welcomed you with the same warm smile as always. There were no accusations. No suspicion. No interrogation. Only one question. How are you feeling? You answered honestly. Lighter. They hugged you tightly. I'm proud of you. At that moment, your soulmate quietly realized something. Months ago, they would have spent those hours worrying, imagining the worst, and doubting everything. Now, they felt calm. Not because they controlled every situation, but because trust had replaced fear. That night, as they sat alone by the window, tears filled their eyes once again. This time, they weren't crying because they had discovered an honest person. They were crying because honesty had changed them. The fear that once ruled their heart no longer had the same power. The next morning, they handed you a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, When I first saw you, I believed honesty had to be tested. Today I realize honesty also has to be trusted. Thank you for teaching me that love grows stronger when fear is replaced by faith. You didn't just change my future, you healed a part of my heart I thought would stay broken forever. As you finished reading, you looked up to find tears streaming down their face. Without saying a word, you embraced them. Sometimes the greatest proof of love isn't a grand gesture. It's the quiet decision to keep telling the truth, even when no one is asking. Together, you both understood that honesty wasn't a single moment. It was a lifelong choice. And as you walked forward hand in hand, neither of you knew what challenges the future would bring. But one thing was certain. Whatever came next, you would face it together. With open hearts, unwavering trust, and the courage to always choose the truth. Months passed, and your relationship continued to grow in ways neither of you had expected. The excitement of your first meetings had settled into something deeper, a quiet confidence that came from knowing you could rely on one another. You no longer wondered whether the other person was hiding something. Every conversation, even the difficult ones, became another brick in the foundation of your relationship. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, you and your soulmate returned to the park where you had shared one of your earliest conversations. The familiar paths brought back memories. Your soulmate smiled softly. "Do you remember how nervous I used to be?" You nodded. "I do. But I also remember how brave you were when you finally told me the truth." They looked down for a moment. "I almost didn't tell you. I was afraid you'd walk away." You replied gently, "If you had kept hiding it, maybe we would have drifted apart. But you chose honesty, even though it scared you. That's what made the difference." A peaceful silence settled between you. Then your soulmate reached into their bag and pulled out a small notebook. "I've been writing something," they said. Curious, you opened it. Inside were short entries from the day they first noticed you until the day they confessed everything. One page described the moment you returned the lost wallet. Another recalled how you admitted your mistake instead of blaming someone else. One entry simply read, "Today I saw someone choose truth when no one was watching. Maybe real honesty still exists." As you turned the final page, your eyes stopped on the last sentence. "The greatest test wasn't whether they were honest. It was whether I could learn to trust again." You looked up to find tears in your soulmate's eyes. "I used to think love meant never getting hurt," they whispered. "But now I know love means having the courage to be truthful, even when you're afraid." You closed the notebook and held it carefully. "It tells the story of two people," you said. "One learning to live honestly every day, and the other learning to believe in honesty again." They smiled through their tears. In that moment, there were no more questions about the past. Only hope for the future. As evening turned into night, you both stood beneath a sky filled with stars. Your soulmate took your hands and made a simple promise. "I can't promise life will always be easy. I can't promise we'll never disagree or make mistakes. But I promise that I'll never let fear keep me from telling you the truth again." You answered with your own promise. "And I promise that honesty will always have a safe place with me. We'll face problems together instead of hiding them from each other." The two of you embraced, knowing those promises were worth more than perfect words. Years later, when people asked what made your relationship so strong, the answer was never about luck or fate. It wasn't about grand romantic gestures. It wasn't about never facing difficulties. It was about a choice made every single day. The choice to listen before judging. The choice to speak the truth with kindness. The choice to forgive when someone sincerely admitted a mistake.